My name's Paul Bestall. This is Mysteries and Monsters on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Welcome to this week's Mysteries and Monsters. Well, fresh from making her Mysteries and Monsters debut back on episode 52, Shannon LeGro returns, alongside Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters, to discuss their latest series, On the Trail of UFOs, with Shannon joining the team as our guide across America. The 8-part series is due to be released on the 20th of March, and I've been fortunate enough to watch all of it. It's a fantastic compendium of cases featuring some of the most well-known investigators in the UFO field today. We cover several of the cases, which have all been added to the show notes if you want to dive in and find out more. Okay, so I've had a couple of emails recently asking how people can donate to the show, which is really kind of you, so thank you. So I've actually got a way you can now donate at the moment. So I've set up a PayPal account. So essentially at the moment, every penny that the show costs comes out my own pocket. And essentially, I just want to push the show a little bit further. So if you want to donate and help, I will be greatly appreciative. And you can donate any amount. I'm not going to ask for $10 or $20 or whatever. You know, if you want to donate $1 a month, then that's fine by me. Every little bit will help me push the show further. I just want to upgrade the quality of the show, get some bonus content done, live investigations, and get the website off the ground. And unfortunately, to do more, it's going to cost me more. So I'm not very comfortable in asking for help, but here I am. So if you want to help, then just look for us on PayPal under Mysteries and Monsters, and you can donate any amount. Essentially, if anything goes wrong with my microphone or my kit, the show's scuppered. And I don't want to be in that position, and I hope you don't want me to be in that position either. So, like I say, if everybody donated £1 or $1 a month, then we could do so much more for you guys, and I hope that's what you want. So if you want to help me, like I say, you can just look for Mysteries Monsters on PayPal and just send us a little donation, if you'd like to, of course. And we'll see how we go. Alright? Don't forget, you can always drop me a line with any feedback, guest suggestions, or if you also want to appear on the show, or even sponsor us. Jack Daniels, just saying. Just fire us an email across to mysteriesandmonsters@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook. We're under Mystery Monsters on both Twitter and Instagram. And as I mentioned earlier, you can donate to the show by searching on PayPal for Mystery Monsters. Okay. Thank you for listening, and now let's join Shannon and Seth on the trail of UFOs. This week we are delighted to be joined by Seth Breedlove and Shannon LeGro to discuss the amazing new series On the Trail of UFOs that sees Shannon join the Small Town Monsters crew as they dive headfirst into the UFO phenomenon in an extensive 8-part series. A massive welcome back to both of you. Thank you for joining me again.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, firstly, thank you, as always, Seth, for sending me the previews of the upcoming series.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, what a piece of work. I can only imagine.
Are you talking about Seth or the project?
Yeah, well, I've noticed Seth's got a bit of new ink on him and a new haircut. Man, he's looking good. But
well, I didn't know where that was going to go because you said that. What a remarkable piece of.
That's usually my job to call names. I mean, I like you already, Paul, with your interview style here. I like it.
Well, I like to keep him keen, keep him on his toes, because I don't want him getting comfortable here.
Oh, no, we have to.
Absolutely. So, yeah, relax, Seth. It's all good. I mean, I'm always impressed by the length and breadth of the work that you've done. But this seems to me like probably the biggest piece of work that you've done to date, because you are extensively crossing the United States, up and down, left and right. How does it feel afterwards, looking back and looking at that 12-month period where you're essentially going to every hotspot you possibly could?
Yeah, I mean, it's also the longest shoot in STM history by a long shot, because I think Shannon could probably correct me here, but I'm thinking it is between 25 and 30 days. Especially if you include like some of the smaller interviews I had to conduct even when Shannon wasn't there, it's regardless, like it's the biggest thing we've done. So, I really lived and breathed this thing for the better part of the year, because even when you're not filming, you're thinking about it in some capacity. And then once you got into the edit, it was an edit that started in late October and didn't finish until late January. So that for us is a very long period of time. A typical STM movie is done editing in about a month and a half, 2 months. So for me, I was basically neck deep in this thing for the better part of the last year. And so for me, I think I looking back on it, I have nothing but fond memories. We really had some of the biggest laughs I've had in the last decade were on this shoot, especially. And then, Shannon we've always been close, because Shannon and I met, and weirdly enough, we met in 2014 at a taping of Finding Bigfoot here in Ohio. But we had never really had the chance to work together on this level. Shannon was involved on the trail of Bigfoot, but that was like a one-day thing where she flew out and then we shot and then she went back home. Yeah. And so for this, she was, unfortunately for her, she was like neck deep in STM insanity for the better part of the year, and especially when it comes to like the East Coast shoot, which was that definitely was the longest single shoot we've ever had, because that was something like 12 days or something like that. It was a very extensive shoot, and she was a part of she was a part of the end of my family vacation, and then she was trapped with Tommy, my 2-year-old, in the backseat of a car for like 12 hours, and
trapped is a strong word.
Yeah. But it was just, looking back on it, it was my favorite aspects of the parts of this were my favorite shoots ever. The West Coast trip we did out to Nevada and Arizona is probably my favorite STM shoot that I've ever been a part of, and that was a big part of that was just the camaraderie we had, like Shannon, Brandon, Jason, and I. Like it was such a fun trip and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the short answer is it was an insane year-long trek, but it's one that I'm really eager to try to recreate pretty soon.
Yeah, how did you feel, Shannon? Because obviously this is a major undertaking for you personally to this extent. Obviously, as Seth touched on, you did pop up on the trail of Bigfoot. And you've obviously done little bits here and there, but was this a far greater undertaking, both personally and professionally, than you anticipated?
I think that, like Seth said, the camaraderie that we all have with each other makes all the difference when you're doing something like this. I mean, I totally agree with Seth as far as my favorite portion of filming for On the Trail of UFOs was when they came here, essentially in my backyard. I sometimes when you're from a place like this, especially, not only do I live here, but I grew up here. When we pulled outside of Vegas, and we were in between Vegas and essentially just outside Boulder City, and we pulled over and we were just getting a little bit of B-roll, and the guys were just like so in awe of what to me is just, well, it's just the dry lake bed and an open, desert area. But it was refreshing to see from somebody else's perspective what my backyard actually looks like and how beautiful it is. And that was just the start of the trip. And, we even have pictures that got posted of that road stop. I know Seth remembers that too. But for me, the East Coast trip, I mean, we stayed in two different extremely one was definitely haunted. The other one had a possible intruder in Florida. Haunting would probably be a more hopeful way to look at what happened in Florida. But it might have been the drunk neighbor downstairs. We're not quite sure. And then, we ran into a car trouble, which could have turned out very serious. But, I mean, things were on our side to get things done because I quickly Googled and the next Enterprise, and it was within like 3 miles, and we're in the middle of basically nowhere. We're not, in New York City or anything like that where there's all these options. So we definitely had some speed bumps along the way, but it had nothing to do with, the chemistry of the crew is just something so special, I think, to me, that, I mean, we could be in Wuhan right now and still be having a blast, even though we were in lockdown. So,
That's actually on the trail of the coronavirus.
Yeah. Careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed it from top to bottom because essentially it was like a tick box of all my favourite Fortean researchers and ufologists. I mean, how difficult is it to kind of draft a list of who you want to speak to? I mean, was there anybody that you originally anticipated interviewing, Seth, that you just couldn't pin down or was unwilling to be part of it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there always are. And I think with something like this, where you're stepping into a subject that we haven't really been... I mean, we've done ufological themed monster documentaries, but we haven't really gone into the phenomenon yet. And so we're a relative unknown in the world of ufology. And, I'm not bagging on anyone, but I think for a lot of UFO researchers, that's kind of a turnoff. They, I think a lot of those people would see us as sort of a non-entity within that realm. So, they're just not interested in it. So there were definitely some people we wanted to speak to who more or less just walked away because they didn't know who we were. So yeah, there were quite a few of those, but I think at the end of the day, like we talked to the people we really wanted to talk to, and I think more importantly, we talked to the people who could or were the most qualified to sort of steer the ship from a storytelling standpoint. Like the interviews for this were extremely different from my previous experiences with interviewing sort of subject matter experts, and especially the subject matter experts. We essentially, I would say the average interview length had to have been at least an hour, but some of these interviews went 2 or 3 hours long, which for us is really unusual. David Weatherly's was like 3.5 hours. Alejandro Rojas was almost 2 hours long. Like a lot of the interviews were really extensive. And, those people had to help sort of guide the entire series. And you see a lot of those people pop up throughout almost every episode. Linda Zimmerman is a big piece of the whole puzzle. Alejandro, David Weatherly. But yeah, I mean, as far as like someone who I really want to get involved with and have in the series, if we can do something like a season 2 or a 3, would be like I'd like to get George Knapp involved.
Yeah.
I'd like to get a UFO, another UFO journalist, kind of like Knapp, involved as well. I think that's an important piece of this that we didn't have in these episodes. But I mean, for the most part, I have no complaints as far as who isn't in this season, because the thing clocks in at over 4.5 hours long, and there are giant chunks of some of these interviews that didn't make it into the final season. I mean, as is, we have almost 30 people. It's 29 people we interviewed, and the better part of Butch Witkowski's interview is not in this series at all. Yeah. And so like there's huge chunks of interviews that got cut out of this. So it wasn't like we were lacking for people to talk about the subject.
Yeah. I mean, did you kind of have a sort of top 10? Because I know you go to some places. I mean, there's a couple of cases that I've only really skimmed the surface on, so I've dove into them more after watching the episodes. The primary one was the Exeter Incident, which I, to my chagrin, didn't know that much about. I knew of it, but didn't know the level of credibility of the witnesses and the testimony. Did either of you come across something that completely changed your opinion about a particular incident? Because you do deal with some pretty big cases that, for some people, may say, "Oh well, we know everything we need to know about." For example, the Betty and Barney Hill case, which I think is good. But I thought it was quite refreshing the way you've gone after that in this particular season, personally.
Yeah, I mean, the way we use those cases, and the way we use every case really throughout the entire series is more of an introduction to a larger subtopic. So, you know, I had no delusions that what we were doing with like Betty and Barney Hill was going to be groundbreaking or brand new. For most people know that story. You know, so the biggest thing for me was something like Exeter really just sets up the theme of that episode, which is that episode is all about, you know, what the various theories are about the origins of UFOs. And but I do think you can do some interesting storytelling things with those cases and expand on them in ways either subtextually or more in your face than what people are used to in UFO documentaries. And that's what I was trying to do with something like Betty and Barney Hill, where we have the snippets of Betty actually talking about the incident. And for me, the guiding principle was always that we get back to focusing on the people and how these events impacted them. So I think for me, it was the Betty and Barney Hill episode that really that opened my eyes to some of the aspects of that case that I was unaware of. And I had actually researched that case earlier in the year for an episode of Monsteropolis, and there were still a lot of things that I learned in prepping that interview or prepping that episode and then delving into it myself and just being there. Like Shannon could probably talk to that too, but like just being in the location where the Hills were abducted, that area is incredibly isolated. And if you think back to the 1960s and what it would have been like to be in their position alone and followed for about a half hour by some sort of strange object in the sky, that alone is pretty terrifying. But when you include the other aspects of the case and them being abducted and all that, it really, and then you're in that location, you see what it's like. I think it really makes the whole thing come to life, and you definitely gain a greater appreciation for the historicity of that event.
I'm actually really tired of, Seth always, stealing my thunder, and we're always thinking the same thing at the same time. I literally have 2 words written down to to talk about Betty and Barney Hill, that was the same thing that I was going to cover. I have remote and isolated written down right here in front of me.
Yeah.
That was exactly what I was going to say about that as well. And even today, it's still a very isolated place. There, we found the one gas station where we took the photos of a handsy alien with Zach, and it's. And it back when they had that experience, I would have been absolutely terrified, whether it was a misidentification of something else or not. If you're being followed, like Seth said, out in that area, you have nowhere to go. Absolutely nowhere. There's hardly anybody out there now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other one that I gained an appreciation for that I don't think I've always been aware of Exeter.
Yeah.
And I've always been somewhat fascinated with that case, but I think again, like, this is something that in general speaks to what Small Town Monsters does, I think, and that is just like being able to put people in the places where these things happen. You I forget about how important that is.
Yeah.
And then I will do something like go to the actual site of the Exeter Incident, and you can see it, and it just brings the whole thing to life. Like, I don't know how else to say it, but when you're in a place that is so important to the history of UFOs and the UFO subject, and you can have someone like Michael Stevens standing there pointing out to you where that's the tree. The UFO would have actually risen behind that tree and things like that. Like, it's crazy to be in those places and to be able to sort of cast yourself back to that time and experience things, in your imagination that really might have almost seemed like a fictional event prior to visiting those spots. And we experienced that over and over. Shannon and I experienced that in a different way in Ohio when we did the interview with Dan Weiss in Barberton, where he took us to the actual location where he had his sighting in the early 90s.
Yeah, and there's still things fenced off in that area, which we found highly interesting, and just the tie-ins of his story, and where he saw something and then it ended up disappearing, and you're kind of going, whoa, that's amazing, because where in the actual heck could it have gone? But of course, then the conspiracy theories start, and there were some interesting tendrils that came off of that.
Yeah, that we didn't get into at all in the episode. There's some really weird stuff with, like, there's mines under Barberton, and this I have been able to verify, but there's like, what were they, Shannon? What did she say? Like salt mines or coal mines?
Thought it was salt, but now I'm
I don't
forgetting.
know. They stretch either way. They stretch. There's these tunnels under Barberton that stretch all the way to Lake Erie, and Lake Erie is 40 miles north.
Wow.
So there's some really weird where this craft that Dan Weiss saw sort of sink behind these trees puts it in a general area where it's vaguely sort of connected to these underground mines, which in itself just sort of gets your mind racing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always found that interesting, like you've both mentioned there, when you go to certain locations where something monumental has happened. I went, one of the UK's most famous UFO sightings and abduction cases is in a little village in West Yorkshire called Todmorden, where a police officer on duty was essentially abducted by aliens, investigating stories of wandering cows, which essentially gives you how much of a Yorkshire story this could possibly be. And I went there for the first time last year, Saturday afternoon, beautiful sunny day, and I got my list of everything, my location, and there's like a palpable feeling of excitement and a little bit of fear, that you're in a location where someone claims to have had a truly terrifying experience, both physically and mentally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alan's case is remarkable because he also ended up, he had physical damage to his boot. He drew the object, and essentially felt like he was being forced out of the police force because of his honesty in reporting it.
Yeah, I think with a series like this too, and the same with like really all the On the Trail of stuff, but I think that's the strongest aspect of the series as a whole is just is going to any of these locations, especially like Area 51, obviously. But so many of the locations we visited in On the Trail of UFOs, especially, are so ingrained in ufology and ufological history. So Exeter and even someplace like New York City that's tied to it, or I mean, I was very conscious of ending the series in Los Angeles, and the fact that we were able to end the series at Griffith Observatory, which I'm not 100% sure how legal that is, but
we gonna find out.
But what the city of Los Angeles doesn't know won't hurt them. But like Hollywood and LA as a whole is extremely tied into UFOs, and so to end that series with the entire city sprawling behind Shannon as she talks about what she learned during the trip. I mean, I was even aware of that, while we were filming it. So it's always like, the other thing I should mention is I don't know that we'll ever get to do something on this scale again, regardless of how successful this was. This was me throwing everything at the wall.
Yeah.
And as far as like a travel standpoint, I don't know realistically that we can pull off this scale of a shoot ever again.
How dare you?
Well, like the thing is, I think you've got to just things like the 12-day part of the trek, or like that's the kind of stuff I mean. Like we started in Florida and ended in New Hampshire. Like it was, what we did was pretty insane. So there's, it was an intensive shoot. And I just don't know that you could find a more varied series of landscapes to film in, is the other thing. Like I've got my dream locations I want to go to for season 2. Like I really want to hit Colorado and Montana, and things like that. But can you really get, if you watch the first episode jumps around a lot, in setting up where some of the people that we interview are located, and it goes from, I don't know the exact order, but it goes from like Phoenix, Arizona to Las Vegas, which that's fine, they're connected. But then it goes to like Hudson Valley, New York, New York City. You've got, just think of like the locations that are on camera in one episode. I mean, the same with like the Mystery Lights episode. You go from North Carolina to Asheville, New York. I mean, it just jumps around to such an extent, and I don't think you see that even in mega budgeted, huge network TV shows. Not to the extent that we pulled it off in this season, and then with the sheer volume of interviews done.
Well, and just to add to that, that'll piggyback perfectly, because the sheer amount of interviews that we did, everybody, showed up. Nobody had any major snafus. We didn't along the way, considering that we, just the East Coast trip alone was logistically just staggering, and just constantly trying to stay ahead of the curve and making sure that, time zones were straight and days and dates were straight. I know that there was a couple times that Seth and I both were like, wait, what day was that for it was just there was so much information and times and dates and people in our heads that it was a lot to juggle, but we ended up making it work. And obviously a huge high five to everybody that went out of their way to come and speak to us at certain locations. You know, we talked to Micah Hanks up on Brown Mountain. I mean, you know, he didn't have to make that work out, but he did.
Yeah.
We should mention Mark Muncy, because you said there were no huge snafus, but there was a huge. There was a huge.
I wasn't going to throw you under the bus, but if you want to go ahead and do that yourself, go ahead.
Yeah. The first interview we filmed on the East Coast leg of the trip, and in fact, the entire reason Shannon flew into Florida was so we could do this interview with Mark Muncy, and we did Mark Muncy's interview. It was great. It was like 2 hours long. He really filled in a lot of gaps in the story that we ended up actually having to skip over in the final cut because he didn't. He
was a
didn't end up in the
perfect
series.
interview, basically.
Yeah, it was a great interview. So we do this interview, and then Shannon and I, you know, the next day we leave Florida and we head up to North Carolina, and we do all that, and then we head back to Ohio, and then we're in Ohio for like a day. And the day after we're in Ohio, we head to Pennsylvania, and for some reason, and I'm still not sure what happened, but before we left, I wiped all the memory cards. I put everything on an external hard drive. I cleared all the memory cards. We got to Pennsylvania, and all the memory cards were filling up immediately. Like, we couldn't figure out what was happening. We were running through memory cards. We ran through 3 memory cards shooting Stan Gordon's interview. Right. And I couldn't figure out what was happening. So that night, we got back to our cabin, and I started removing footage from all the memory cards.
Well, I remember you saying, this is all terror in the sky stuff. I don't need this. I was sitting right there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there just deleting file after file. And I don't know, Shannon, if I realized it that night, or I don't remember when I realized.
Oh, you did. I saw your face change. I'm like, because you got super quiet. Okay. And usually I'm good about ribbing Seth, but I knew something bad had happened, so I just kept my trap shut, and I just, is everything okay? He's like, I think I just deleted Mark's interview.
Yeah, I deleted Mark Muncy's A camera, which also happened to be the camera that the audio setup was hooked up to. Oh. So what we ended up with, we still have Mark's B camera for his entire interview, but it's got audio that was not workable. And so we lost this entire 2-hour interview that Shannon basically had flown to Florida like to shoot. So that was having said that, I mean, we shot almost 30 interviews, and that's the only one that got scuttled. So I that's not a bad track record. I'm still very frustrated by it.
Yeah, and I shot beautiful B-roll out at NASA in Florida, and my buddy John Jay out there, high five to him, got us passes, and he deleted all my beautiful B-roll that I even took.
That actually is not true.
Oh.
So I still have probably 70% of what we shot at Cape Canaveral, which is...
Oh, never mind. Okay.
Yeah, I have most of that. The problem I ran into with Cape Canaveral was we were never granted a permit to film commercial footage there. So I actually would have to get that footage okayed by the U.S. government in order for us to even use it. And by the time I realized that, it was too late for me to do that. Because originally, episode 8 was actually going to open with you at Canaveral narrating about, I had this whole thing worked out where it's going to be you narrating about like the pioneers of space travel and how that relates to ufological research. That was my original plan. But then I realized really quickly we could end up in a ton of trouble for doing that.
No, it's worth skipping over then.
I might still try to, if we can do a season 2, I may still try to get it back.
Well, I hope so. Certainly based on season 1. Let's hope there is a season 2.
Yeah, that's when we'll have to hit the Colorado and all the middle bits over more on this side of the country. And then, if we get a chance to do something overseas, I'd hazard to say that I'm sure that Seth would love to head over to your neck of the woods there, Paul, because you guys have a plethora of stories and experiences that people could share.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we've got a couple. We've had, strangely enough, last year as I've mentioned to you both before, I went to my first UFO conference here in the UK, and we had a very famous case from 1980 where a forestry worker called Bob Taylor was attacked by a UFO in a wood, and the Scottish police actually investigated the case. It's the only British UFO case with a criminal investigation attached to it.
Oh, wow. 1980 was a hot year out there, huh?
Well, yeah, this is the thing. So, plus also that's the Alan Godfrey year as well. That's when he was taken.
Yeah.
So you've got three of our key cases all happening in about 4 months of each other here. But the guy that was doing the talk on his lecture is a gentleman called Malcolm Robinson, and he owned the trousers, and he still does, that Bob Taylor was wearing when he was attacked, and they were ripped by a spiky ball that came out of this object and rolled towards him, and that's the last thing he remembers. So I actually physically held some British UFO holy grail, as it were, with Bob Taylor's 40-year-old trousers in my hands. So, yeah, why not?
And this spiky ball, this was part of the reason that he got knocked out, or what was the?
Yeah, well,
what was that part of it?
He was just walking down a path, and then he came to a clearing, and there was a disc hovering above the ground, and he was obviously shocked. He was with his dog, and then two balls, spiky balls. So like old mines in the wall. Careful, Seth. I can hear that mind working.
You cannot say certain words around him, okay?
Well, I did well to hold it together myself, to be honest. Yeah.
It sounds like every sex shop we've ever seen, two spiky balls.
We've got some spiky balls in On the Trail of UFOs, actually, and I'm not making that's not a euphemism. We've got the ones that Stan Gordon talks about in the Chestnut Ridge section.
Yeah, that's true.
So they're like, the best way to describe them is if you've ever seen a Second World War film with submarines, and they've got the mines with the points on them. Mm-hmm. Basically, two of these dropped out of the saucer and rolled towards him, and then he passed out.
Yeah.
They're just fans of medieval times. It's just a couple of maces. I mean, they're just... That's all.
Well, why not?
They're collectors. Or they visited the old you-know-what shop. So there you go.
Well, to be fair, Spiky Balls sounds like a bar from a Tarantino film, to be honest.
Yeah.
I could see him utilising that. I mean...
The old vampire dancers.
Well, it's Salma Hayek's there, so am I. Anyway, enough of my predilections. The one episode that stands out for me, and I think it's always interesting, is episode 7, The Taken, where you delve into the world of alien abduction, and I think that's always a difficult subject to cover for most people. Were you both conscious about the baggage that comes with some of these cases in regards to, a lot of people completely dismiss them out of hand, and at the end of the day, you're speaking to people that are telling you incredible things where they probably spent their entire life either bottling it up and not being able to talk about it, or the fact that they've just been ridiculed their entire life over it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you're sitting in front of a...
Start on that.
Sorry. Good, I was hopping in there anyway. All right, sorry. I mean, when you're sitting with a gentleman that he's got his own tales of woe as far as what specifically was going on with him, very invasive, to finding out then that, and it really surprised me. I don't know how Seth felt about this. I mean, I kind of do because I remember we talked about it, but if he wanted to answer, he could. But once he delved into the fact that then his kids started to get bloody noses. And we're talking about two kids, the same morning, and you're kind of going, well, oh my God, I mean, that's kind of a big deal, right? That's now it's affecting your kids. That's when the Dukes should go up and it becomes way more personal, I think. And you guys know I say it all the time. I'm like, once it's in your own home or it's affecting your kids, it's go time. And then that becomes so much more of everybody needs serious probably therapy no matter what had gone on is certainly the situation. I'm not saying he's psychotic. I'm just saying therapy, as far as that's the whole point of the series. It's about the people. What did it do to them? Can he ever sleep again? Do his kids still talk about it? What goes on, this kind of post-traumatic situation that these people are, whether it's perceived properly or not, or we're labeling it properly or not, doesn't really matter. What matters is what happened to the person after, or like this man sitting here just telling us a story, and then all of a sudden the kids are involved. You're going, holy crap.
Yeah, I think I've always found that abduction interviews end up being the most unsettling. We talk a lot about the interview we conducted when we were filming Invasion on Chestnut Ridge with this guy Barry Clark, and what he had experienced impacted him to such a degree that he dropped out of like paranormal research and burned all his files and all kinds of stuff. So I've always been unsettled by that topic, and it was tough. It's tough doing an episode like this because we could do an entire season solely about the abduction phenomenon. There's so much to it that just editing this episode was actually, it's funny I'm saying this because I just looked over and my whiteboard is still my whiteboard is right next to me in my office, and it still has the story breakdown for episode 7. And that episode was super tough to lay out because of how much there is to that particular topic, and knowing how to make it all flow seamlessly from one section into the next and get enough in there so you get a good intro to abduction, while also giving something to people who are very familiar with that subject, something that they might not know, or some new aspect to it that they had never considered. That episode was probably the toughest to edit, because we had to get so much into that, and a lot of that also came down to knowing where to put the different witnesses and stories, because you've also got Dean Merchant telling that story from the 1600s of the missing time incident. That's so fascinating. It kind of kicks the whole thing off. Yeah. And knowing like how to fit Donovan Smith in there, and how to fit Gary Tribert. Gary Tribert is the abduction witness or the abduction experiencer that Shannon mentioned. Gary's story, knowing where to put that was kind of tough too, and knowing how much of it to put in there. Gary's story lasted like 20 minutes in the final episode. I think it's actually still a pretty lengthy run-on interview. It's something like 3 or 4 minutes long of just him recounting. It might be longer than that. Him recounting the things that happened to him. And it's like Shannon said, eventually it spills over to his children and his and also his stepchild. So it was a really creepy subject matter to dive into, and super weird too when you get into like the theory part of the episode, where people talk about like the stuff with alien hybrids and all that kind of stuff. It's such a weird subtopic of ufology, and one that kind of flies in the face of the more optimistic view of UFOs, which frankly, like, I think I wanted to instill a sense of optimism in the series again, because I feel that most of the television stuff focused on UFOs tends to skew into like let's see how much we can scare everyone.
Yes.
This episode doesn't have that same optimism that the rest of the series does.
Yeah. I mean, it is a very difficult subject because I don't know about either of you two prior to the show, but prior to doing the series, but I until last year I'd never spoken to anybody that had claimed to be the recipient of an alien abduction. However, I've obviously seen and heard enough over the year. Obviously, famous case, Travis Walton, Whitley Strieber. I mean, Whitley especially, if you've ever listened to some of his later interviews about the situation, some of it's very difficult to listen to. Because I think that's the other aspect of alien abductions. A lot of people kind of just take it as quite tongue-in-cheek, but essentially what people are talking to us about are sexual assaults.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a difficult situation, regardless of whatever cultural framework we put around it, whether it's a sexual assault in any walk of life. These people are essentially telling us about a sexual assault from visitors from another planet, which it's just sometimes it's incomprehensible to get your head around the ramifications of such a situation for them.
Yeah, and I think as far as the abduction scenarios go, I have heard some of the strangest things from people who claim to be aboard ships. And, one of the episodes for ITF was Chad and Alta Dillard, and they had both been abducted at the same time from a street corner in New Orleans. And, Chad remembers what he perceives as he's aboard a ship, and he sees a big, comfy chair. Right. And he's literally, it's a windowless, seamless ship. He can see out, there's space and the whole nine. Okay. And people can take this as they will. But there's a big old comfy chair. And it looks very inviting. And, there's a chair on a spaceship. That's another, take that as you will. But something in his mind told him not to sit in it for some reason. He said, I just knew I was not supposed to sit in that. It was a bad thing. I'm like, you're already aboard a ship, but yet you can't sit in this chair. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many. Just how or why did his mind come up with that? If you just want to assume he dreamed the whole thing, but that's a whole other side of this one, because they have actual physical evidence, which we've heard of before. You brought up Strieber and everything. So I've just heard some of the strangest one-off random things come up when it comes to abduction scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Calvin Parker last year, who is the surviving witness from the Pascagoula incident. And once again, that's one of those cases where I knew a little bit, because obviously Charles Hickson, who was the other abductee, had been quite vocal about what had happened, and obviously Parker couldn't comprehend and basically just disappeared off the radar for 40 years. And when you look at that story on face value, obviously you'd only got Hickson's version of it, but Parker's just takes it into a really difficult and dark place. And I suppose it's good to see that you've not shied away from it, but I would imagine, would you say that's probably the hardest episode that you had to sort of work?
You mean just because of the subject matter?
Yes.
Or
yeah,
I mean, I think definitely because of the subject matter, and then just trying to piece it all together. It's definitely of the 8 that was the one that we had the hardest time with. And then, like we already talked about this, but to be in the location where Betty and Barney were, and be out in the dark. Like, we were actually out 2 times in areas within a couple miles of where the abduction happened.
Yep.
The first night was the night the scenes that actually bookend that episode, or the scene that actually begins that episode, where we climbed up to Artist Nook and the hike that actually opens the episode. That was at sundown. We started up and it was still light, and by the time we came down, it was dark. And it's incredibly creepy to be in that location so close to where that abduction happened, and be out there after dark, even though you're with the crew. Obviously, it's still unsettling. And then the second time was the opening of episode 8, the final episode, where we are out with Carolyn LaRock filming. Yeah. That was within 10 miles of where the Hills were abducted. Yeah. When Alexander saw that thing fly across the sky and all that stuff. So it was the most difficult episode from a subject standpoint, and then also just probably the creepiest experience that we had during the shoot was just being in those places after dark.
I mean, regardless of the rarity of these events, I mean, I'm probably like you two. I'd have been thinking about all the cases. I'd be like, yeah, this is where they were taken, and I'm thinking, right, okay, yeah, there's more than one of us here. But then I'm thinking, well, Travis Walton was with 6 people when he went, and I'd be building up this paranoid complex around me. I'm not too sure safety in numbers would even reassure me in a situation like that.
Yeah.
We're not that lucky to have that happen, full-on abduction while filming something like this. I mean, I was waiting for it. I was like, give me the sign like the girl in ID4. Take me, let's do this thing, then we'll really have some stuff to discuss.
Very much so. I mean, it's thankful that none of you went through the Richard Dreyfuss journey from Close Encounters, where, obviously he's a prime example of the abductee who's positively wanting to be taken, but he's not really sure why.
Well, and then you just, you find people becoming truly obsessed, and that's a great example of that, albeit it's fictional, but we've all seen people that become obsessed, whether it's Bigfoot or UFOs or ghosts or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I mean, the other aspect of that particular episode I was really interested in was David Weatherly's and the marvellous Eleanor Haskins, who I've heard a couple of times speak, and it's nice to see her getting a wider audience, one would hope, who both touched on the Fae. And I thought that was interesting because I've always found the parallels between, as they both mention, we call it over here, because obviously it's predominantly a British tradition, that when people disappear, they've been fairy-led. Like taken in the woods or in fields, and then obviously Eleanor mentions the changeling scenario, which is more of an Irish tradition, and I've always found that kind of aspect really interesting, those parallels between modern ufology, abduction, and the old folklore legends of being fairy-led and the changeling, because it's only 100 years ago, 1895, there was a woman killed by her husband because he claimed she'd been fairy-led, and it wasn't his wife anymore, it was a changeling, and he burnt her to death.
Wow.
It's a hell of an excuse to get rid of your wife, you're really pushing it there.
Absolutely, and he served 15 years in prison in the UK, and he emigrated to Canada in 1910, but he was the last conviction for his alleged defence was that she had been kidnapped by fairies. In a court
15 years? That's all he got, huh? For burning her up.
Manslaughter, because they couldn't prove that she hadn't, apparently.
Interesting. Yeah, the other thing with the abduction scenario, you can go the Fae route, and then you also hear once someone has the classic abduction scenario, taken aboard a ship, and they come back home, then they have poltergeist. What we would tantamount to poltergeist activity going on in their homes, and they've got furniture moving and lights going on and off, and so it's, I don't know. There's so many different ways to run down all of these paths when it just comes to the abduction scenario.
Yeah, I think we were really conscious too of wanting, or I know I was really conscious of wanting to have that folkloric aspect of that episode included, because I think it gets overlooked a lot. That the abduction phenomenon, even though most people associate it with more of despite the hills, obviously most people associate it with sort of coming into prominence in the 80s, and then really rocketing into popularity with like the 90s and X-Files and stuff. There's actually a history of this kind of thing, and so you establish that with the 1600s story that Dean Merchant told that took place near Massachusetts, but then you can talk about that European folklore and how this goes back. There are so many similarities to the Fae, and there's been books written about this kind of thing. I mean, Jacques Vallée has touched upon this Fae idea, so this isn't anything new, but it is something that gets overlooked a lot. So, and that's part of what I was talking about with like the difficulty of laying the episode out, because this one episode touches upon so many different things in such a short span of time. But it's the episode I keep being told by people that it's their favorite. So it seems like we did a somewhat decent job with this one.
Absolutely. No, I that's where I found it wonderfully, is the way that you'd because it was really interesting to see, like you say. I agree with you there, Seth, and I think it's a very overlooked facet of this particular part of the phenomenon. But it also, I think, is it episode 2 where you dive into the airship phenomenon of the late 19th century, which once again, I think a lot of people have basically said it was all a hoax and they've just pushed it to one side. So it was really good to see you touch on that again.
I think they see the airships as either a hoax, like a newspaper inspired hoax, made up stories, or they see it as, well, they think of it as, well, those are just Zeppelins. Like, that's just the time when Zeppelins were around, except it really isn't. Yeah. It doesn't align with that same period of time exactly. It's just off by a few years. And the other thing that came to me in the edit, and it's not a part of the episode, but there are correlations. Well, I guess there is a mention of this, actually. There are some weird correlations between the airship phenomenon and the black triangles, in that they seem to be in no way trying to escape notice. It's almost like Lynn Kitai said, it's almost like a parade or something. With the black triangles, it's like they want people to see them. And it was the same sort of thing with the airships. They're out there late at night with their lights shining down on farms and stuff, like they want to be seen. And then you've got, 100 years later, you've got something really similar to that happening. It's just a different style of craft that's being seen.
I mean, I think once you open that doorway as well, Seth, like you say, you realise that there's a lot more to it than just newspapers trying to outdo each other because I'm sure, we've all come across those particular stories, and it is fascinating because, like you touch on there, a lot of the witnesses report seeing people walking about or waving at them. Yeah,
there were people waving at people from portholes on the airships. There were people. There's a few accounts I found where people came down ladders from the airships and interacted with people on the ground. Yeah. There's a story, and Mark Matsky might have mentioned this one, but there's a story of a man being taken on board one of the airships. And when he asked who the people were, they said they were just from another place. Yeah. It just throws a whole new wrinkle into the UFO topic.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the Phoenix Lights is obviously probably the most, maybe stretching it a little bit, but I suspect it's probably the most famous modern incident, that, especially the level of witnesses and the fact that we've got numerous recordings of it. How did you find being in that particular area? Because it's still considered a very active area.
You want me to take that one, Sam?
Yeah, you go, Shannon.
I had never been to the Phoenix area before, and it reminds me of Vegas in a lot of ways, except it is more sprawling, it is bigger. So for something that large to, as Seth said, not care who saw it and for how long, it was pretty astonishing to be in that area and to see just how packed in it is. It would be no different than that happening here in Las Vegas. And there's just no way that, if we're assuming that these are piloted by intelligent beings, that they would be like, well, there might be something down there that could see us, So they obviously do not care. But I don't know. I think for me, the triangle situation, and we also talked to Sean, Kevin, Jason here in Las Vegas, and he had a sighting, on his way out to Area 51, of all places. And that, again, was a situation where a triangle was settled on top of him. It didn't care that he was there, but it was aware because it was close enough. He said he could throw something and hit the thing. It was aware he was there. It was like it came down and it just wanted to be known. Hey, we're here. I tend to lean more towards people and advanced technology when it comes to specifically the black triangles, obviously. And those do obviously exist. We know the name of those. But I don't know. Some of the maneuvers that these things can do also make you wonder if a human was on board, could they physically handle said maneuvers? Would they be able to survive such a thing?
Yeah, the Phoenix thing for me, the other thing about visiting Phoenix, I mean, obviously for me, all of that was new. Yeah. I'd never really spent any time in Arizona or Nevada. I haven't really experienced a desert outside of, I used to visit LA. I used to be in LA a lot. But that's really my only West Coast desert experience prior to this filming. So for me, everything was new. The thing that was most new was the fact that I was told almost immediately when we got there that scorpions sneak into your bed at night and sting you. So I was really excited.
I made sure to show him my camel spider picture, Paul. Do you remember that one when
yes.
I took the picture of the camel spider on my back door? I said, don't think they're not in Phoenix, pal. We had a whole conversation just as we were getting into Phoenix, and he was getting visibly just put that thing away. I'm sick and tired of hearing about scorpions and camel spiders.
Yeah. So that was great. I was real excited to meet a camel spider and a scorpion. But the other thing about it was just like going. So there were two things that stand out. One was going up to South Mountain at sunset, and being able to look at the area where the lights would have actually first been seen. And then also, and it's like Shannon said, how big the city is and how sprawling everything is. And then the other thing I think was seeing the little like museum display that they have at the Historical Society, which, as someone who got into all of this because of my fascination with towns and their cities and their embracing or not embracing of the cultural importance of these events, it's cool to see that Phoenix is starting to, if they hadn't already, they're starting to embrace that the importance of the Phoenix Lights. That there's literally a little exhibit that you can walk through that's entirely about this UFO sighting. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because I think that kind of gives it a little more credence. I think primarily because there were so many witnesses of what are usually claimed as reputable professions, but they seem to give a witness from a doctor or a council worker or a police officer far more credence than Bill who might work in construction, if you know what I mean. So, and I think obviously Dr. Kita is one of the primary witnesses, and because of her medical training, I think the whole city seems to have embraced what happened to them that night.
Yeah, I think Lynn definitely plays a role in that, but I also think it's just that there were so many people. Yeah. Lynn's become a sort of spokesperson for the Phoenix Lights, but there are thousands, literally thousands of people in Phoenix who saw something that night, who've come forward and talked about it, who may have spoke about their experience and then just kind of walked away from it. Yeah. That's what the average person does. And I think that many people witnessing something and then talking about it is why that incident stands apart from something like Exeter. There's just something about the Phoenix Lights and the fact that it's a mass sighting where you can go throw a stone in that city and probably come across someone who saw it. That's how, I mean, to the extent that while we were filming or not while we were filming, but obviously in the last like 2 years, Kurt Russell came forward as being like one of the witnesses of the Phoenix Lights. So it's a massively important event that is only going to become more widely acknowledged as we go on, especially with things like what's going on with TTSA. As the subject becomes more mainstream, I think Phoenix is only going to become more of an important event than it already is.
Do you guys feel that Phoenix and the people of Phoenix were basically, stuck into a test tube that night with the events of the Phoenix Lights, especially those that saw it up close and moving as slowly as it did, just to see what the reaction would be?
Oof. I've always been taken aback by the number of witnesses, the descriptions of it, and the fact that the excuses and the explanations kept changing, and then it's just a really weird case. I mean, the Fife Symington press conference where he brings somebody out dressed as an alien.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing, it's just there's a lot of different things at play for me. It's a really weird event, even if you just look at the response to the media to the witnesses in the first instance, because they were all basically made to look stupid.
Yeah, the ridicule factor with that one was really high, and it's what's so strange about that is attempting to cover up a mass sighting of whatever. I'm not saying it was extraterrestrial, even if it was something government, whatever it was. The idea that you can cover that up or smooth that over or shush it up by mocking what is going to what eventually turned into literally thousands of people is like laughably stupid. I'm not real clear. Like I get ridicule being a weapon, when you're talking a few dozen people or whatever, but you're talking a massive number of people that you're now sort of calling crazy, which just makes no sense.
Yeah. And the other aspect as well is that I'm sure this was brought to your attention that there was one kid who said, I looked through a telescope and I saw, did he say he sees 7 microlights flying across in formation? And all of a sudden everybody goes, well, that's what it was then. Well, hang on, you said 3 weeks ago it was flares.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, like you say, because of the number of witnesses, because the ridicule factor seemed to be ramped up to 11, for especially at the beginning. I mean, Symington, especially because he was the key player in the ridiculing of the councilwoman that brought the case forward, because obviously her constituents had said, what's going on here? For him to then do a complete 360 10 years later and say, well, actually, I saw it as well, just takes it to that adds another layer to it, because that just came from nowhere.
Yeah, and when you factor in the fact that we also know, because of like we interviewed Ron Regier, who worked on that geosynchronous satellite at the time, 3 satellites in a geosynchronous orbit around the globe, and they were able to track that object all the way as far from Phoenix as Area 51.
Yeah.
So whatever that thing was, it was tracked. Its movements were tracked. So the idea that it was flares has always been completely nonsensical anyway. But you can clearly tell in a lot of the video that those aren't flares.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I've heard a lot of people basically, whether they're just trying to come to peace with it themselves, Shannon, like you refer to, that they're happy to believe it's some kind of black ops operation, is also interesting, because for a lot of UFO witnesses, they know, as far as they're concerned, it's not the government, it's not our technology. So that's another aspect to it that makes it interesting.
Were there any people for that claimed the full-on abduction experience?
I don't recall seeing anything about that. when I was researching it, and that was actually something I tried to find.
Yeah, I think it is notable in aspects that it's probably the highest profile case without anybody trying to weave that into it. Because I'm not aware of a case either. But I'm certainly no expert on Phoenix. I know a lot about it because I've watched the film documentaries countless times over the years. It's a fascinating case.
Yeah.
I mean, like you two say, were you surprised that, you know, as Shannon refers to at the end, it's almost as if you've hardly learnt anything despite doing so much. Was that a source of frustration or anticipation as to what can come next?
I'm dead. I died immediately. You asked that question, I just passed away. I'll answer it and then I'll let Shannon pick it up. But yeah, for me, you know, I think I came into this series thinking I knew a decent amount about UFOs, and I really do. Like before I got into Bigfoot, I was into UFOs. So I've been into the topic longer than most of the stuff I've looked into. But you know, and I think I had a pretty good. I thought I had a pretty good idea of what might be behind it.
Yeah. And
now on the other side of making the series, I think I probably know less than I did coming into it, because I just don't think. I think there's so many different phenomena at play. I don't think it's one thing. I think there's numerous things going on that account for UFOs. And when you start bringing in things like mystery lights, like we talk about in episode 6, or the abduction phenomenon, you might be dealing with two aspects of this that are always written into UFOs and ufology that actually have nothing to do with UFOs. So it's interesting that on the other side of the series, I feel like I know less, and I don't know that there's. I don't, you know, like we keep getting, we get asked a lot about like disclosure and stuff, and I'm in the camp that I don't think that's coming. Like I don't think that's, despite the popularity of the subject, I don't think we are going to be told anytime soon that UFOs are. Well, that's a different thing. Yeah. Okay, it's we're not going to be told that aliens are here. You know, like they might admit at some point, yeah, UFOs are here, and they already kind of have. Yeah. But it's the origins of the phenomenon that I don't think is going to be ascertained anytime soon.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with Seth there. That would be the ultimate bomb drop, is the whole the ET side of this thing. Yeah. We know there are UFOs out there. That part never surprised me at all. Maybe that's why UFOs are not shocking to me at all, because I'm on the camp that how could we possibly be the only things out here? But you start telling the general public that aliens are coming, and they might stick something up somebody's Yahoo sometimes. Yes. Yeah, people are going to freak out, and why in the hell would the government ever admit that? That wouldn't be probably a very good thing.
Well, that's always been my take on it as well, in regards to the fact is that I don't think any government in the world can literally turn around and say, yes, UFOs are real, they come when they want, there's nothing we can do about it, and occasionally they might take some of you. Anyway, carry on, nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and if I could just say, as far as, you know, going into it and what I took away from it once it was all over, I mean, Seth and I have both at this point talked to enough people to know that people are passionate, and, you know, they're, as I said before, they can get very wrapped up in it in good ways and bad ways, and some of these people, it affected them positively and others negatively. For me, actually sitting down and talking to some of these people, obviously someone like Gary, who we mentioned his kids also got affected, that is a more negative side of things. And I think that the passion, when you're sitting in front of somebody in person versus just over the phone or Skype, it certainly comes out more, and you can the stress of something or the passion that someone imparts is much stronger when you're sitting there with them in person, and you really you can definitely identify with that, at least on the human level, and either feel bad for them or go, oh yeah, like I'm totally on board with what you're saying, and I do that too. I'll have to Google something or make notes on something, or oh yeah, I have to get a book on that. But for me, I think the locations themselves I was starstruck just by the locations themselves, to actually be at the gates of Area 51, where we very fortuitously ran into an MP, and then we ran in there like an undercover convoy with matching rental vehicles. I don't know how that happened, but it did. It was a lightning strike of wonderful proportions. And, like Seth said, to go where the Exeter incident happened. And it's funny because, there's just, we're parked in front of a home, and there's a beautiful landscape behind you and these trees and an open field. And they're like, okay, that's that. And that's the tree. Mike's telling us about it. And to be there, I'm just kind of going, I can't believe I'm actually here, after reading about it and hearing about these things for so long. And then again, just to swing back to Betty and Barney Hill, kind of going, I'd need my brown pants if something like that happened to me in this area, because there's nobody around. Yeah. And this was, we were there just not too long ago. So back then, forget it. And they don't have cell phones or anything. What are they going to do? You're going to get your brown pants out. That's what you're going to goddamn do. That's it. So, yeah, I think just being starstruck by the locations is what really, I was trying to be all cool about it, but I was
that brown pants. That brown pants line was my favorite line that Shannon said in the series, and in episode 7, as the episode's ending. It's very emotional, and she came in with that, and it was such a scene stealer.
It's from the heart, It's just like a Bigfoot sighting. Get out the brown pants, man.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to concur, to be honest, because as much as I'm interested in many of these subjects, if you experience. I'm very blasé about hauntings and ghosts, because it just depends, but I suppose I've been quite fortunate. Like cryptid hunting, it's a case of be careful what you wish for, because, yeah, for the grace of God go I suspect. So,
yeah.
I mean, other than this phenomenal journey that you and the rest of the teams have all been on, is there anything that... have you got a somewhere that you all wanted to go and you just couldn't fit it in, or it was just logistically impossible, that if you decide to do it, and I really hope you do based on this, a season 2, where's the first place you're going to go? What's your number one priority?
As cliche as it is, I really want to hit Roswell, and then Shannon and I have both mentioned Montana and Colorado. Those are all locations that are on the season 2 must list. And then Florida is probably going to be in there again, and Texas. I really want to get. I really want to do something about the Cash Landrum UFO, because that's one of my favorite stories, actually, like UFO stories. So those areas are all must for me. I don't know about Shannon.
I mean, yeah, that was basically nail on the head, and then that pretty much takes care of most of the states. I mean, not all of them, but at this point, we've been all over the place, and certainly pulling for a round 2 for On the Trail of UFOs.
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to get to Lucky Hill in Indiana. That is one thing I keep forgetting to. We were going to make a movie about Lucky Hill when we were, I forget, it was going to be one of the, I think it was the movie that became Terror in the Skies.
Yeah.
Originally, we were either going to do a movie about Belle Gunnis, or we were going to do a movie about Lucky Hill. And we ended up doing Terror in the Skies. But, Indiana would probably be a good location, too.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, if I could suggest somewhere, if you ever get the chance to, I think Shag Harbour's got to be your nearest out of United States location. I'd like somebody to have a real good look at
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Castle Andrew because that's one of the first new alien abduction stories I came across, thanks to the marvelous sightings from the early 90s, because I saw them both interviewed on it, and that is both a perplexing and terrifying story in equal amounts.
Yeah, the physical effects from that one are really, really fascinating, and then just the fact that it was basically handled the same way Phoenix was on a smaller scale, where the family's just kind of ridiculed out of existence.
Yeah, well, the very best of luck, and I hope so. So, listen, thank you for your conversation today. It's been fascinating. The show's amazing. I can't wait. When's it going to be released officially?
The official date that it drops is March 20th. So yeah, that's Friday, March 20th.
Fabulous. So what's next on the agendas for both of you after this fantastic collaboration?
Go for it, Seth.
We are, in 2020, STM is putting out 4 productions in total. So the first one will be on the trail of UFOs. The second one will be on the trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman. Mm-hmm. The third will be the Mothman Legacy, and the fourth will be the Mark of the Bell Witch. So that's our 2020 slate, and we also will be beginning filming multiple productions this year as well. So we'll get into filming on the trail of Bigfoot season 2, hopefully on the trail of UFOs season 2, hopefully another Untitled on the trail of project that we have coming for next year. And then we also have to figure out what we're doing for our feature film or films for 2021 as well. So we got a lot coming.
Marvelous. Another busy year ahead then.
Yep.
Oh, and make sure everybody comes out to Mysteries and Monsters in.
Oh yeah. Mysteries and Monsters at the. That's the best title too. I can't imagine where that came to us, but we have the Mysteries and Monsters event at the Canton Palace Theater. We got to pay royalties to Paul, but
I was honoured and
Mysteries
impressed.
And Monsters. Mysteries and Monsters event takes place. I don't know. Maybe this episode isn't coming out till after that event though. But the event is on March 21st, Saturday, March 21st.
Also true. I didn't think about that. Apologies.
Yeah.
Made you go through all that for nothing. You're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks.
It's all right. I will be doing it just before, so that'll work.
He's like, great. I just changed everything around because that just got brought up. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I'll just. Next year, plane tickets fine. Okay. That's all I want. Royalties. I don't need royalties or anything. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I can be a token English guest.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Told you we got sponsored by Virgin Airways, so you're good.
Yeah, Jack Daniels and Virgin. We're laughing.
Oh yeah. It's got to be a given, man.
Absolutely. Shannon, what's next for you, my love?
Second book, Paramalgamation, is going to be out. The official release date should be April 28th, but we are pushing that to actually be released a few weeks early. Yep. Of course, Beyond the Fray Bigfoot is out now, and it's going to be announced tonight on my show, but you guys will hear it here first. Not technically your audience, though, so there you go. That didn't really make much sense, but I'll keep plugging on here. Okay. UFOs will be the third book.
Awesome.
So... really looking for both stories from the show and, of course, stories not heard on the show. So I can thank Seth for really getting the bug bit with me in the UFO thing. So time to ramp up the UFO talks. Getting the bug bit in the bits.
It's not a sentence.
Oh, I made it one, and everybody will follow the thread that I just laid out right there. Okay.
Yeah. It's nice to hear somebody talk the way my brain does.
See, Paul gets me.
Yeah.
Paul gets.
I've just got a lot of empathy, I think. And don't forget your chapter in Woodknocks as well is just out, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is. I was very, very happy to be part of that. Actually, me and Sam Sheeran were both featured in the same book by David Weatherly, Volume 4, Woodknocks.
Oh, fantastic. So listen, thank you again for your time today. Right, where can everybody follow you both on your online and keep up to date with what's going on in both your super hectic schedules?
Go, Seth.
Smalltownmonsters.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, and onthetrailof.tv. You can find out more about On the Trail of, and the series will be available on Amazon and Vimeo on demand for streaming, DVD and Blu-ray at smalltownmonsters.com. And we are in the process of working on a much wider release for On the Trail of UFOs. So later this year, possibly even within the next couple of months, I think there will be a very wide rollout for the series.
Fantastic.
And for me, it's intothefrayradio.com. Of course, the book is on Amazon. Pre-orders are up for Paramalgamation. And, of course, you can go to beyondthefraypublishing.com for either of those or a signed copy of Beyond the Fray Bigfoot.
Well, thank you again for your time. Absolutely adore the series. I can't recommend it enough. Like I say, I've watched it twice in its entirety. I know I'm going to have to watch it because there's so much going on in it. It's a fantastic piece of work. Congratulations to everybody involved, and hopefully we'll speak to you both again soon. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you.